So here we are into part 2, and as you can see I have finished doing the actual cloth. I've done it very basically. I haven't zhuzhed it up too much, and all I've done is I've gone round with what they call it's not a chain stitch, it's a petal chain stitch, slightly different, but anyway. And I've just gone over that, and for my 1, 2 and 3 to represent past, present and future, I have decided, and longevity and timing. Anyway, I've chosen to simply do some little pentacles. I thought that would be easier, and they're simply just, and the back side of the cloth is quite messy. Now if you want to be very pedantic about it and very precise, you could put 3 is the most important, so you could put 3 at the top. Obviously you don't necessarily have to use this method. This is just the method that I use. It's the method that I find easiest to understand for me. Now it's not very, bear in mind that I'm a hedge witch. I'm very much about what's local to me and such. Like this is not local to me at all. The way this is done is very much cast, the way you cast is very much leans upon an old African tradition. So okay, so like I said, all I did was daisy, started from the middle, daisy petal chain stitched out from the middle to each end, and then did the center, so it's clearly marked. Now I'm going to sit down. I want to explain a bit about the bones and why you have to have them a certain length, or why you use bones in the first place. So 1, 2, 3 and 4. You quite often have bones of different lengths and different shapes, because that makes them a different weight, so they fall differently. Now, although this may not seem much, even the different lines will make these fall differently. The reason also why you have different length bones is because sometimes they will fall and land on one another. To be honest, I don't often read it unless I think it's pertinent to the questions being asked. So if bones cross, I tend not to read them as such. So the fact that these probably won't cross, I could have done them slightly bigger. I could have used some lovely bent pieces of wood, which you could do. You don't have to have them all straight and neat. You could have them any way you like. So this is where it's going to start getting really complicated. Like I said, the bones are different weights, so they land differently. I think this just makes it slightly simpler, slightly more simple to read. If you have roughly, like I say, you do need them long enough so that you can see a difference end to end. So obviously this is my pointing end and this is my non-pointing end, because this is where my numbers are. If I wanted it the other way around, I could have it the other way around. But either way, when you've done your collection pieces, no matter what you've used, you decide which is the pointing end and which is the non-pointing end. So the pointing end is most important. So we are going to disregard for the moment what happens if bones cross. Basically, you could, if 1 crossed over 2, you could say that maybe 1 is creating pressure on what the second collection piece means. It makes the second piece less important, the first piece more important. The first piece has a bearing, a significance on how it tampers down. Now, number 4 is the least significant. It is what's considered to be the weakest of the casting pieces. It's the least powerful. It really represents, it's a bolster to the other bones in a lot of ways. It's more of a lightweight sort of thing. But if this is say, very close to a bone and they're both pointing in the same direction, then it adds more significance to the other bone. If there's any doubt, if there's any pause in the reading and there's something that's unclear, this least powerful of the bones can help make it clear. It's a focus bone, focus piece. So this kind of, yeah, it's the only way I can explain it. I mean, say like the bones were cast and let's just do this, and they ended up like this. Well, number 4 and number 3 are both pointing to this segment. This is the pointed end, and they're pointing to the number 2 segment. So if it's unclear on what this bone may mean, this helps clear it up. Kind of strips away all the ums and ahs and the smaller questions and helps you concentrate on the true meaning of this. So it helps strengthen this relationship. This will help strengthen it. Okay, so number 3. Now this would represent, by the way, this represents the small bone, the tiniest one. If you're using bones, this is the smallest bone. This would represent, number 3 represents the broken bone. It tends to show what problems there may be, what walls may be put in front of the problem. It focuses on what could go wrong. And it's not that it's an unlucky thing, it's just that forewarned is forearmed. The only other thing you've got to worry about is if it corresponds and points in the same direction as these two, then that can be quite bad luck. That's a foreboding sense. And let's face it, when you cast bones or collections, as the case may be, it does tend to be a kind of darker side of divination. It's not all airy fairy light. You don't just give the good news. There tends to be a lot of bad news as well, but like I say, forewarned is forearmed. Now, if number 4 and number 3 are pointing in the same direction, like I said, they could be over like this, but if they're both pointing to the same segment, then the casting becomes quite negative. In completion, the whole casting becomes quite negative. So number 3 is, you can call it the negativity cast if you like. So number 2 would be what would be considered the longest bone in the set, the biggest bone if it was a bone. Now it is the all power of the reading, so this is what the reading is mainly about. Now whether it answers the querence questions isn't actually relevant. It kind of does its own thing. It's quite an independent piece. You may want answers to some questions, and this piece will decide whether you'll get those answers or whether it wants to answer something completely different that you haven't even asked yet. Now, unusually, if this is in the same segment as your negative bone, even if they're pointing in different directions, if it's in the same segment, then it lessens the negative impact. Number 2 is so powerful, it can lessen the negativity of number 3. It tends to be thought of as not instant. So if you're making any long-term plans, this is the bone that will answer those questions, the long-term questions, the life questions, the really heavy questions. So number one is the little fat bone. That's what this one represents. Now, it's kind of like the hidden strengths, not necessarily of the querent or the caster, but the hidden strengths that may help you overcome any problems. Now let's face it, when people have a reading, they're usually because there's a problem they want answered or a problem they want solved. So this, just the fact of having the bone here, it's so difficult to explain. This is what I mean. It gets really complicated. I think that's basically it. I mean, it is, like I said, it represents what you may use, what you may not realise you can have to overcome the problems that may be represent in the casting in the first place. Now, if it points to the same section as number 2, it kind of cancels out anything number 3 does. It makes it a really positive reading. So if they're both pointed to the same section, the positivity of the reading is increased a lot. It becomes a much nicer aspect. Number 1 is the fun. I call it the funny bone sometimes. It's the friendly, it's the nice bone, it's the bone you want to be your friend, it's your best friend. So that's that one. So there we go. So we have the fat bone, the long thin bone, number 2. Number 3 would be the broken bone, and number 4 would be the small bone, and that's what they represent. Now I've gone before slightly into what these segments can mean. I always, by the way, when I put them down, they always go in reverse order: 3, 2, and then 1. They represent mountains, trees, or plants, and animals. And it's all to do with longevity. So things in this segment are going to go on for a long time. Things in this segment will be overcome quite quickly, or they will evolve quite quickly, but not hugely quickly. In this segment, number 1, it usually means pretty much instant. Very, very quick. If you're using castings and you want to know about past, present and future, then 3 represents the past, 2 represents the present, and 1 represents the future. Now the only other thing that I'm going to mention before I finish this segment is sometimes the way you cast denotes past, present and future. So if you cast sinister, so you cast with your left hand, this can represent past. And obviously the past has a lot of bearing on how we conduct ourselves in the future, how we learn from our past mistakes. If you want to cast for the future, some people will only use their right hand and throw from right hand. If you want to know about the present and how things are affecting you now, then you cast with both hands. I tend to cast with both hands and include that as past, present and future. I think it's a much easier way to cast if you use both hands, and then you can get your collection or your bones really moving around. So that's it. That's the set all made, and just the casting to sort out now, and that's where it starts to get really complicated. So I'm not going to go into that today. I'm going to cut this now and finish this today. So like I said, you don't have to use a cloth. You could use a piece of paper and draw this. You don't have to have a cloth. You do whatever's easiest for you. This is just something I wanted to do, so I did it. But to be honest, you could just use a piece of paper and it would be just as good. So I'm going to go now, and I'll be back very soon, and we will talk about casting and what it actually means and how I cast using this method. Like I said, it's from the Oracle of the Bones by Claire O'Neill. It's not her actual method, it's just that that's what fitted in best to the way I did things originally anyway, and it kind of made sense of how I cast bones and collection pieces. And it's probably, once you've got there can only be a certain amount of readings you can do, and once you've got the hang of it, it's quite easy to, you take notes, write it down, and then go on from there. Always have a reference handy, and you'll understand that more as we go on. So thank you for watching, witchy people. I will be back very soon with the next bit of this. Bye for now.